This video here is one that I meant to do a little while ago. Somebody had left me a personal message asking me some questions about building their own homemade boiler that pretty much runs off of wood. Now, I've never actually done a project like this myself, but throughout the year of 2011, I was looking at a couple of videos, and if anybody was actually subscribed to my channel throughout that year, you would see over the summer of that year that a lot of my video activity, or a lot of my YouTube feed, was basically subscribing or liking and favoriting boiler channels, whether it be boilers that were homemade, outdoor wood furnaces, or etc., etc. Now, looking at a couple of these videos throughout the year, I've seen quite a few people have actually, and these are people that actually live out in the suburbs or live in country areas or woods areas or whatever, have actually managed their own boiler or made their own boiler systems to save money so they wouldn't have to pay for fuel. Now, there was a couple of videos that I looked at, but the question that I was asked, or that this YouTuber had asked me, because he was planning on making a boiler with an oven built into it at the same time. Now, this is something that I've seen done before in another YouTube channel. The guy's name is Mime Chef, if I'm not mistaken, where he has done this with a boiler, an outdoor boiler that he built for a hot water heating system that had a pizza oven built inside of it as well. Now, I don't recommend combining the two and putting them into the same unit. I think you should have your heating system separate from your cooking devices. I just think it's a bad idea. I think you lose efficiency when it comes down to that. And there's a couple of principles that anyone needs to know when it comes down to actually installing a boiler and operating a boiler most efficient and most effectively. If you take a look right over here, you actually see I'm sitting next to a boiler. Now, this is a boiler that I purchased for experimental tests. It's a Wiley McLean gas boiler, and even though I never got the opportunity to run it off of gas, and if you take a look over here, I have the gas burners, the jets, and you see all the other stuff that's in my shop. It's actually a damn mess right about now, radiators all over the place, but that's for another video. Anyhow, what I do want to talk about in this video, there's a couple of key things that people need to know when it comes down to actually building a boiler. If you take a look at modern boilers nowadays, there's a lot that you can gain from them that you can actually use to actually make your own boiler if you choose to go that route. Now, what I've also learned throughout watching some of these videos throughout 2011 is I've seen a couple of videos where people had these homemade wood boilers, and when they would open up the combustion chamber, what I would see in there would be a bunch of tar buildup and soot. And this is the same, I think it's called creosote. And this is what also causes chimney fires. And I couldn't figure exactly why that was happening. I think I pretty much had an idea, and I knew that it was due to a lack of heat and an improper flame. So when I looked at a lot of these videos, there was a lot of things that simply didn't make sense. But if you actually take a look at how modern boilers are built nowadays, even to the big Scotch Marine boilers that I operate on my job, there are certain things that they use in order to run these machines correctly so they burn as clean as possible. Now, one thing about a boiler, if you're going to build a boiler, like I've seen people build boilers with garbage can barrels. I don't recommend that because, number one, the metal is kind of thin and it'll wear out and it doesn't hold a lot of insulation. So every couple of years you're going to have to replace the metal and add new metal on there just to keep your system running. Me personally, when I do things, I want to have it done right so it lasts the next 10, 15, 20 to 30 years. That's just the way I look at it. I think long term, and that's the way I want things to be done. Which is another reason why I decided to invest money into this. Now, the only reason why I haven't done what I would have liked to done with this is because I don't have the allowances to do so. Because I don't live in a suburb area, I'm actually in a city area. And of course, it's a lot more difficult to burn wood inside of one of these environments. So, what I would say, if you're going to build your own boiler, number one, you want to have your combustion chamber or your fire chamber as close as you can to your boiler, whether it be using heat exchanger tubes or heat exchanger sections like this boiler currently has. And I'll see if I can actually get a quick shot of the exchanger sections. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that. But one question that this man asked me was how was he going to get his domestic hot water? He wanted to have the water come from the boiler. Now, you were planning on actually using the water inside your boiler to make hot water for drinking purposes. Don't do that at all. It's illegal and it's contaminated. You can't do that because you'll have the same rust particles now going in your drinking water, and the two are never supposed to mix. But what I'm going to show you is ways that you can actually do this. But if you're building your own homemade boiler, and supposedly, from what I remember, this is going to be a radiant heating system. Now, I've never seen a radiant heating system in operation. From what I understand, it's underfloor heating where they run plastic tubing underneath the floors, and it warms the floor up, and that's what transfers heat into the house. From what I understand, and for what people say that they're the most comfortable heating systems, but there's a couple of things, or one thing that I pretty much don't like about them. Number one, I like to see what is heating up my home because I know exactly what's going on. And number two, in case there's ever any problem, meaning there's a leak or whatever, it's going to be substantially expensive to actually rip up your floor and trying to troubleshoot to find out where exactly that leak is at, just in order to fix it. So those are the two things that I don't like. And number three, I would say, is I don't know how effective these heating systems are if it comes down to a drafty home. Now, we all know, whoever lives in a cold state, if you ever seen one of these or have one of these in your home, you know when these are on, they can work in any condition. They can work in drafty conditions, they can work in mild conditions, pretty much any condition they can heat up, unless you have it to the point where it's unreasonably drafty. Now, getting back to the point at hand. One way that you can go about getting domestic hot water when it comes down to your outdoor or homemade boiler system is to buy a heat exchanger tank. Now, these can be a little expensive. I don't know, well, this guy, he lives on the other side of the world, so he's not even in the U.S., so I don't know exactly what they call them there, but over here they call those heat exchanger tanks. And basically what that is it's a tank that, depending on the size of how big your house is and how much water or gallons per hour that you're consuming for hot water, will be the size of that tank. And pretty much what that tank has inside of it, it's a tank that can be relatively small or it can be pretty big. And inside of that tank, you would have coils that are wrapped up that your domestic water flows through. Now, around those coils inside of the tank itself, what you would have is a body of hot water that's transferred directly to your boiler, into that tank, and back into the boiler through a circulator pump. And pretty much how you would regulate your temperature is through an aquastat. Now, an aquastat on this type of system here, it would be very effective, and it would keep your water temperature at a comfortable rate where it doesn't fluctuate as long as your boiler equipment is running, and it would keep the temperature at a consistent level. It wouldn't drop or increase by no more than about 5 degrees, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the next way to do this is if you're going to use the boiler and you don't want to go with the heat exchanger or with the indirect fired water heater, what you can do is this. Now, depending on if you know what you're doing, what you can do is put a hot water coil plate on your boiler. As a matter of fact, let me give you a closer look. Should have my flashlight in here somewhere. Okay, there we go. Let me flash the light on this one. Now, you see this right here. Once you get past all these wires, I can get this light to just point up there. Piece of damn junk. Alright, let's try this. Okay, that's gonna have to do. Now you see this here, then we move these wires. This is exactly what I was telling you about before, an aquastat. If I can loosen this up. Now you see that there's numbers on the gauges here. Right now I have it sitting at 180, even though it doesn't do a damn thing because there's nothing to operate the boiler with. But you can bring the number to wherever you want it to to get your water temperature. And pretty much what you would have, let's say probably the maximum temperature anyone would need would probably be 130, just to keep it at a comfort level. But this here, what you see is a coil plate. And you see two openings, and these are 1/2-inch openings. Now this is just a small boiler for a small residential home. What you have is, one is the inlet and one is the outlet. And pretty much with this coil plate, this whole thing can come off. And inside of that plate, what you have is a coil that runs inside of the boiler itself. It's a little coil that's wrapped up and it pushes all the way or close enough to the back. And that draws the hot water from the boiler. And like I said, you never have the two waters mixing with one another. And there's also another plate along over here. As a matter of fact. And this is it right here. And pretty much if I were to remove this, what you would have is just an opening. And if you wanted to install another tankless coil, and that's what they call a tankless hot water coil. And this gives you domestic hot water where you can have an endless supply of hot water. So no matter how many times you take in the shower or whatever, and washing dishes or whatever, you're still going to have a boatload of hot water. Now, also taking a look at this boiler, you see I do have gauges on here. I got the gauge glass because this is a steam boiler and it has a low water cutoff. And it has, you know, your return and other little taps on the side, as well as your draft chimney stack, your pop-off valve, your pressure troll, and the pressure gauge. And then you have your steam header. Now, I'll tell you a little something about this. If I ever managed to get the allowances that I would need to have in order to burn this off of wood, I already have a thorough, clear idea of what I'm going to do. Now, with that being said, the first thing I would do with this here is I would get a heavy gauge steel firebox. I would have that customly built. And what I would do is I would have the bottom of the boiler sit directly on top of that firebox. It would probably be, excuse me, it would most likely be probably 2 to 2.5 feet in height, and maybe a good 2.5 feet in width, just so I could be able to put a good amount of logs or decent sized logs inside of this thing. Inside of that firebox, or the firebox, of course, that's what it's called. What am I saying? I would have I'm trying to remember the name of the insulation that they used. The same insulation that they used on the refractory for a commercial boiler. I would have it completely surrounded with that refractory insulation. On the outside of the steel, I would pack it with fiberglass, like the same fiberglass that's here. As a matter of fact, let me show you again. If I can get this damn camera off. You see the yellow that's there? That's fiberglass insulation. Now, the key thing a lot of people need to understand when it comes down to operating a boiler system, you need to have insulation on your boiler. You want to have it as insulated as possible so you retain as much heat in that boiler and keep it going directly into your water. Because when you have this is going to really help you out or help you maximize in a lot of areas. Now, here are some of the damages when it comes down to overfiring a boiler. And why, if you're going to build your own homemade boiler, and I've seen a lot of people do this, and they don't put insulation on the boiler. They don't wrap it with anything, so it's like it's a waste, and you're going to burn a whole lot more fuel than what you actually need to burn. Because when you do this, what you also are doing at the same time is exposing your metal to heavy firing, which can lead to a major amount of wear and tear, and can after a while can corrode your boiler or rust it out or even rot it out to the point where you now have leaks. And once your boiler starts to leak, you're done, unless you got a good welder that can come by and do it. So what you want to do is actually have the outside of your boiler insulated like this is. This is another reason why if I ever did choose to do that, I would use this boiler here because it already has insulation all around it. And the only thing I would have to do is right down here is have a firebox. Basically, this boiler will be lifted 2 to 2.5 feet in the air, and I would have an insulated firebox. Where all the heat transfer is surrounded by ceramic refractory insulation, which is a high heat insulation, and it can sustain a lot of heating. Now they also talk about in modern wood burning stoves how they have a superheated chamber, air chamber that supplies superheated air inside of that chamber. They say that this is best for maximum combustion, so you don't get a smoky fire, so your flame burns clean once your chamber is heated up. Now, if I were to choose to do this, what I would do is I would have the firebox with an additional compartment on the or in between the firebox and the insulated metal. And pretty much what I would do is I would have an air chamber that flows on the outside of the firebox, which will on the outside of that air chamber will be insulated by the fiberglass wrapping. And pretty much what that would do, I would let it gather the heat from the firebox itself and then dump it back in to the boiler or back into the fire chamber. Now it might sound a little complicated on what I'm saying, but if you can focus or just really picture on what I'm talking about, you'll see what I'm saying. Because from what they're saying, that superheated air helps wood to burn at its maximum efficiency. You get the most BTUs, you get the cleanest fire, you get a nice bright flame is what you really want, or you get nice red coals. You don't want to look inside of your fire chamber and see a bunch of cookie tar residue built up all over it, because that can lead to a problem. Another thing that you need to have is an excellent draft when it comes down to your outdoor boiler, or whether you want to have it inside or whatever. Now, if I was to go through and do this, like I said, I would have the superheated chamber. If I were to go that route, what I would pretty much do is probably have a blower motor that blows air through the outside or through the inside of the exterior walls of the combustion chamber. That way it gathers enough heat and supplies it directly right back into the main combustion. Or there's another way you can do something. Now, here's a common thing that I see with a lot of chimneys and wood burning stoves, and if you can, I would say avoid this. A lot of people have the fireplaces that use the chimneys that are inside of the wall of a house where it's wrapped with brick or whatever the case is, and I wouldn't go that route if I could. What I would do is I would use, and I've seen this before, they got insulative smoke dampers. Let me get this damn thing off. Come on. Wants to give me a hard time. So pretty much, you see what I'm talking about here, the smoke damper. Now, if I were to actually convert this to a wood burning boiler, what I would do, because I don't like this setup at all, and as you can see, there's pretty much nothing underneath it, so it just uses draft to pull it back up. But with this being said, they also sell one that has a sealed draft that goes directly on top of the boiler and above the heat exchanger section. So what I would do is I would have one, I would replace this with a different style. So I would order a new top and a new back piece to do this. And what I would do is I would have, instead of using this, I would either use a super insulated, because they sell them with it, where it has the insulated wrapping around it. So that way you hold as much heat as possible. And when you got this insulated and when it's hot enough, what you pretty much get is a very good draft. Well, you probably wouldn't even need a blower motor to give you a good draft or to start it up with, because once this is hot, that's going to automatically pull as much air out as possible. And I would more than likely probably expand it just so I can have a larger, or pull out a larger demand of air if I needed to. And how I would regulate that is I would have a damper on the firebox that would control the intake. Basically what I'll be doing is regulating the intake, not from the chimney, because all you do is wind up causing a bunch of smoke to build up inside of your boiler system, and you can cause a lot of problems that way. Also, they make hot water boilers like this, but me, I went with a steam boiler, and I'll tell you exactly why I did that. Because I like to have more options. Because with a steam boiler, you can also do hot water. The only thing you got to do is just reconfigure it, put a circulator pump on there, and get you an expansion tank, and you're good to go. A hot water boiler, it can be a little bit more difficult to configure them to steam, so that's another reason why I would just rather go with steam. I got the gauge glass and I can see everything that's going on, or I could just simply put a circulator pump on there and I can still do both. So I love options. Aside from that, another reason why I would want to have a chimney that runs outside is because I would want to have, in case there was a fire, like a chimney fire, because a lot of times if you get a chimney fire inside your brick chimney, your house can catch on fire as well. Me personally, I don't like that option. I don't even like that even becoming a possibility. If a fire were to break out, I'd rather it be inside of the chimney and let it burn all that stuff out of the chimney on the outside, where it pretty much runs alongside of the wall. Let that burn out, and when it's done, you have yourself a clean chamber and you can go and address it then, or whatever the case is. You don't have to worry about losing your entire home or whatever. That's just my opinion, and me, I like to operate safely. Now this is a cast iron boiler, and I'm going to see if I can actually get underneath this boiler so I can show you what the heat exchanger fins look like. I'm going to have to move some of this stuff out the way though. I got a lot of junk inside of this shop here. Okay. Back in here. This boiler weighs quite a bit, so it's gonna take me some strength to actually get it to the ground. I've done it. You see the maneuvering tactics that I'm using here? This shit weighs a ton, but I got it. Okay, all right. Let me give you a quick look. Change your fins that are underneath this machine, and then I'm gonna close up this video. Charge that light up too. Get the hell off of here. God damn it, everything gonna give me a hard time. And this is the inside of a Wiley McLean gas boiler. And now those heat exchanger fins, as you see, it has 3 sections. This is the first one, the second, and the third one. And they're thick as hell. Now these heat exchanger fins, the pins that you see inside, and that's these little teeth looking things. And as you see, they count across each other. And the reason for that is to hold as much of that heat inside of this boiler as possible. Now this is a gas boiler and there are gas jets for it, and the gas jets are supposed to sit right down where this is at here. And when the heat goes in there, the heat or the flame never touches the heat exchanger sections. Just the gases and the heat from that touch the heat exchanger sections, causing the water to bring it to a boil. And those heat exchanger pins, like I said, are to hold the heat in there as long as possible before the heat actually escapes. All right, so let me lift this thing back up right now. As I mentioned before, this boiler is not a lightweight piece of equipment. So, here we go again. Just on the final note, I'm not going to make this too long. Anytime, now this is not for just people who are building homemade boilers, or this is pretty much not even for them at all. This is for anyone who has a boiler or who's purchasing a boiler, whatever the case may be. Anytime you go to purchase a boiler, there are a couple of things that your boiler distributors are going to try to tell you. Certain crocks of bullshit that they're going to tell you. Now, let me go ahead and explain that. Whenever I buy a boiler, or if I were to buy a boiler, I want something that can either make steam and domestic hot water, or hot water heat as well as domestic hot water. The more options you have, the better. That's the way I always look at it. Now, I went with the Wiley McLean gas boiler because this was the only boiler, along with the slant fin, that they make a gas boiler that does steam and domestic hot water, that has the hot water coil plate, or the tankless coil. They're going to tell you, don't go with that. That's what your company's going to tell you. You see, you go to any plumbing supply place, they're going to tell you that, and it's a bunch of bullshit. We're going to say is, well, you don't need that because it's not efficient. Just get you a regular hot water heater and it's more efficient. It's a bunch of damn nonsense. Here's the next thing that they're going to tell you when it comes down to a steam boiler in the comparison with a hot water boiler. And let's just say that, because they got hot water boilers just like this, the same make, it's just it does hot water. They're going to tell you that the hot water boiler is more efficient. Most of them don't even know why. And it's not because the boiler is a better built or it has more insulation. No, the hot water boiler is more efficient for one reason and one reason only. Now, if you compare a Scotch Marine boiler, two Scotch Marine boilers to one another, hot water versus steam, the boilers are equally as efficient. And I'm going to tell you exactly why. Let me move this to the side view once again. Oh, the hell with that. Look, here we go. Get the fuck off here. Once again, this piece of damn shit. Whenever you're dealing with a steam boiler, the one thing you got to realize is there's a level for how far the water can go. And the water usually goes about halfway to maybe 3/4 of the way up. The heat exchanger sections of the boiler go to about this height before it actually ends. So the only reason why a hot water boiler is more efficient, or you get more BTUs into the water. Now, remember what I'm saying, into the water. It's not more efficient in general, but just more BTUs go into the water. For the simple fact that when you have steam, your water level cuts off here. So remember, you have gases or flame coming up from the bottom, and pretty much the most it can heat up is about halfway up to here, and the rest of it is just going up into the air and going out through the exhaust pipe. Now, with a hot water boiler, you got the entire boiler filled with water. So that means more of the heat that's coming from the ground or coming from the burner jets is going directly into the water, or more of it is being kept into the water before it actually exits out. That is the only reason why, when it comes down to a cast iron boiler, a hot water boiler will be just a bit more efficient. Not because it's a better make, not because it's a better build. So don't ever let them tell you that bullshit. Let me just give you a quick shot at the burner jets for this machine also. Right down there. Now back to what I was closing out with. They're going to tell you to go with a regular hot water heater. Me personally, I don't do hot water heaters if I'm going to purchase something for domestic hot water. because hot water heaters run out of hot water within about 2 showers. They say, oh, go ahead and just buy a bigger one, but that's more gas you have to burn. Just with your average 40-gallon hot water heater, it's going to take about 45 minutes from scratch for that water heater to reheat that water. Remember what I said with a boiler, all you're doing is exchanging heat. So you're not pulling or pushing water out of the boiler. All you're doing is exchanging, pumping cold water in one and hot water comes out the other. The water that's inside of the boiler, that's inside of this here, never comes out. It never gets forced out, none of the above. But they're going to tell you to go ahead and purchase you one of these hot water heaters. And it's going to be a bunch of bullshit because these hot water heaters go in about 10 years, they're going to crack on you and you're going to have water all over the goddamn place. So if you choose to go with a boiler, me personally, I would say get a boiler with a tankless coil. Now, what they're going to try to tell you is, well, if you don't want to get a hot water heater, what you can do is get an indirect fired hot water heater. You do that in the event that you have no other choice but to. Now, those can work very beautiful as well, but they're also very expensive. But my question is, why do that when you can have a boiler that does this and this? I mean, this all depends on your finances. Now, the advantage with an indirect fired water heater that uses water from the boiler to heat your domestic water is you can have a consistent temperature at the comfortability level that you wanted at. That's simple. The only disadvantage when it comes down to using your tankless coil inside of your boiler, whether it be this one here or whether it be this one directly in the front of the boiler, the problem with that is you have to have a mixing valve, because if you're doing steam heat, you know you need 220 degrees, 215 degrees just to get it to a boil. Once you start bringing steam pressure up there, depending on whether you're using 2.5, 5 pound steam pressure, you're going up to about 250 degrees, roughly around that temperature. So you're going to need something to drop the temperature down on that water, because you're going to have water coming out scalding hot. So you're looking at a temperature of hot water coming out at about 170 degrees. That's where it can possibly max out or even greater. So you need a mixing valve. So that's the only disadvantage with that. Those mixing valves, they're not consistent. They don't hold a consistent temperature. So you have fluctuating temperature when you have heat coming up. Now, if you're just making hot water, then you can have a very comfortable temperature. But the one thing that you need to remember is whenever you're using your boiler to make domestic hot water heat, it is easier to maintain the water temperature rather than to rebuild it from scratch. Now, anytime you go ahead and you purchase a hot water heater, they're going to tell you, if you buy a boiler, don't get a tankless coil. That's bullshit. Tell them to go fuck themselves if they tell you that. But they're going to tell you, don't get one of those. They're going to tell you to go with a hot water heater. And what I'm telling you, I've dealt with enough hot water heaters. This is always a common problem. Unless you get a tankless coil hot water heater, they are a waste of money. They are not efficient. What's going to happen is you got water that comes into the hot water heater. Let's just take these two for example right here. Let's say this is your inlet for hot water and your outlet for domestic hot water, not for heating purposes, for drinking purposes and taking a shower. This whole thing is filled with water. Anytime you take a shower with it and the hot water gets pushed out of here, you have cold water, fresh water being dumped inside of here. So all your water that you spent to heat up, all your hard-earned money that you spent to heat up your water now is getting forced out and shoved out of here. Eventually what's going to happen is the water that's inside of this here is going to become infiltrated and it's going to get cold, leaving you with a serious problem. Now, most people are not going to realize this, but you're going to come to realize, and I say you got one of these piece of shit hot water heaters in your basement as well as a boiler. And in the wintertime, you're going to be burning substantial amounts of money. Your electric or your Con Ed or heating bill is going to go through the roof because of this problem. And you're going to wonder why. You're not going to have constant hot water. You're going to have to take your showers real quickly. You know, the temperature starts dropping down. You got to keep adjusting the hot water because the temperature is always getting colder on you. That's what always happens. It's a common problem. You don't have this problem in the building because you don't deal with hot water heaters. It's pretty much your boiler source that makes that hot water. So like I said, what you never want to do is have to worry about dealing with that, because once you've completely infiltrated that hot water heater with cold water, it's going to take about 45 minutes to an hour of that thing running straight, consistently, just to bring that water back to consistent temperature or back to satisfying temperatures. Now, when it comes down to your boiler making hot water, in the summertime or in the wintertime, this is probably going to run less than 5 minutes or under 2 minutes just to maintain that temperature. The only time it's going to take a while is if you had it off for a long time and now it has to restart again. And even then, it's probably going to take a lot less to bring this water temperature up, because you got maybe about 5-10 gallons inside of the boiler versus a 45-gallon hot water heater. My advice, do not go with a regular standard hot water heater. They are a waste of money. Regardless of whatever they tell you, the plumbing supply contractor is going to sell you this pipe dream and this lie. Tell them you don't want it. If you get you a boiler, you go shopping for a boiler, you get one with the tankless coil built inside of it. That way you have more options. Even if you want to use a hot water heater or an indirect fired water heater, you have that tankless coil as a backup. Now, anybody who knows how to plumb them in can do this without a problem. And that way, in case your water heater fails, you have backup. Simple as that. And with this, like I said, you have an endless supply of hot water. You have heat at the same time. And what's the purpose of having two devices do two different things when you can get it all at one? Now, I don't understand how that's not efficient, but that's what they're going to tell you. It's not efficient to have your boiler make hot water and heat at the same time. But it's more efficient for you to have a boiler that makes heat, and then you have a separate hot water heater tank that runs off of gas. A regular standard hot water heater tank, it takes about 45 minutes to heat up just to bring the water back up to satisfying temperature. Doesn't make any sense, but that's just my quick advice. The video kind of got drawn out, but this is to help whoever out who's trying to get into this project. Anyway, maybe I'll post another one down the line.